France, 1940. As German panzers thunder forward, British infantry brace behind rifles nearly as long as a man, and heavier than any weapon they have ever carried. This is the absurd solution to Britain's anti-tank crisis, a so-called too-big-to-fail gun that Germans once mocked, until it punched through steel and left crews trapped in smoke and terror. But for this brutal rifle and the men forced to carry it, every victory would come at a cost, and its moment of power was already vanishing. How did an invention so laughable become a lifeline on the battlefield, and why was its fate always sealed from the very first shot? Dawn, Northern France, 1940. A British rifleman braces himself behind a weapon that looks more like a piece of field artillery than anything a single man should carry. The boy's anti-tank rifle stretches nearly 5 feet from padded butt to muzzle brake, weighing in at 35 pounds without a single round in the magazine. Its steel frame digs into the earth, bipod legs splayed as German panzers roll forward, grey shapes with the confidence of armour and momentum on their side. The gunner's hands shake, not just from nerves but from the sheer weight and awkwardness of the rifle. He lines up on the nearest tank's side plate, barely 15mm thick. The bolt slides home. The air is thick with the sound of engines, treads, and the distant crackle of rifle fire. He squeezes the trigger. The blast is instant and violent. The recoil slams into his shoulder, driving him back into the mud. For a heartbeat, his ears ring, and the world contracts to the taste of cordite and the throb of bruised bone. Inside the Panzer, the effect is immediate. The .5 5-inch steel core bullet, moving at over 2,400 feet per second, punches through the side armour like a fist through foil. Sparks erupt in the cramped compartment, metal fragments ricochet, and the crew is thrown into chaos. Shouts and panic as smoke fills the air, vision slits shatter, and a driver claws at his eyes, bloodied by spall. The tank lurches, then stops dead in the field. For a moment, the German machine is just another box of steel, helpless against a single determined shot. The British gunner feels the aftershock in every nerve, but he sees the impossible, a tank halted, crew scrambling to escape. The boy's rifle, mocked for its size and brutality, has done what nothing else in his platoon could do. Around him, men exchange glances of disbelief and hope, knowing that for once infantry are not simply prey. The price is pain, bruises and ringing ears, but the result is a rare kind of power. In this first shot, the rifle's promise is real. A single soldier can threaten a tank, if only for now. In the opening months of the war, British infantry platoons faced a new kind of battlefield threat, one they were ill prepared to counter. German armoured columns moved with speed and confidence, exploiting gaps and overrunning positions before defenders could react. The standard answer to tanks, the 2-pounder anti-tank gun, was a powerful weapon on paper. In practice, it was heavy, cumbersome, and required a full crew to operate. Units often found themselves trying to reposition these guns under fire, only to lose them to advancing enemy armour, or become stranded as vehicles and horses were destroyed in the chaos. The situation felt desperate. War diaries from the British Expeditionary Force tell of platoons caught in open ground, the rumble of tank engines growing louder, with no time to dig in or lay mines. Mines themselves required careful placement and coordination with engineers, luxuries rarely available when German tanks appeared without warning. Grenades and Molotov cocktails could be deadly, but only if the thrower was close enough to risk his life. The reality for most riflemen was stark. Their Lee Enfield rifles and Bren guns could not scratch tank armour. Even heavy machine gun fire bounced harmlessly off the steel plates, doing little more than reveal their position to the enemy. The speed of blitzkrieg meant that fixed defences and towed guns were often bypassed or outflanked. Infantry found themselves isolated, with tanks suddenly upon them and no heavy weapons within reach. Reports from the front describe the helplessness of men forced to watch enemy vehicles roll through their lines, unable to respond except by taking cover or retreating. In these moments, the need for a weapon that could be carried by a small team, set up quickly and fired at close range, became urgent. British planners recognised this gap, but their assumptions about the pace of armoured development proved dangerously optimistic. They expected to face light tanks and armoured cars with thin armour for several years. Instead, the war moved faster than anyone had predicted. The absence of a portable, effective anti-tank weapon left entire platoons exposed, relying on courage and improvisation rather than firepower. The consequence was raw helplessness on many battlefields. The boy's rifle was conceived as a direct answer to this tactical vacuum, a weapon that could, at least briefly, put the power to stop a tank into the hands of the ordinary infantryman. It was never meant to be a permanent solution, but for a short, brief window it gave soldiers something they had desperately lacked: a chance to fight back. Mines offered a promise of stopping tanks, but the reality on the ground was far less certain. Laying a minefield took time, careful planning, and the work of specialised engineers. In the chaos of a fast-moving battle, those luxuries vanished. Infantry caught in the open rarely had prepared defences, and when German tanks appeared suddenly, there was no chance to set traps. Mines were left stacked in the back of trucks or hurriedly abandoned as units fell back. Reports from the retreat through France and Belgium are filled with accounts of minefields never completed and positions overrun before a single device could be armed. Grenades and Molotov cocktails demanded a different kind of desperation. To use them against a tank meant getting within a few metres, close enough to touch the hull, close enough to draw machine gun fire. British training manuals described the technique in dry language, but soldiers understood the truth. Attacking a tank with a grenade was almost always a suicide mission. The only chance came in cities or forests, where cover allowed a stealthy approach. Even then, the odds were grim. Many who tried never returned. Machine guns and rifles offered no comfort. The .303 rounds of the Lee Enfield and the Bren simply bounced off armour, their impact little more than a warning to the tank crew that infantry were nearby. Heavy machine guns like the Vickers fared no better. Their fire might shatter a headlamp or dent a vision slit, but they could not break through steel. Worse, the muzzle flashes and noise instantly revealed the gunner's position, drawing return fire from tank-mounted weapons or supporting infantry. Platoon diaries from 1940 are filled with terse references to machine gun nests wiped out after opening fire on armoured vehicles. Even the celebrated 2-pounder anti-tank gun, when available, was often too heavy to reposition under fire. Once the shooting started, crews struggled to limber up and escape. Many guns were lost as their teams were forced to abandon them during rapid withdrawals. For the ordinary infantrymen, these shortcomings were not theoretical, they were lived experience. Again and again men watched tanks roll through their lines, untouchable, while every available weapon proved useless at critical moments. The need for a weapon that could be carried, set up quickly, and actually threaten armour became impossible to ignore. The boy's rifle was not born from optimism, but from the bitter reality that nothing else worked. At the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield, the mid-1930s brought a new urgency to the drawing boards. Britain's planners, still haunted by the memory of tanks lumbering through the mud of the Great War, now faced a faster, leaner threat. The spectre of mechanised armies was no longer theory, it was a problem demanding a solution. Inside Enfield's workshops, engineers gathered around blueprints labelled with a single word: stanchion. The project took on an air of urgency. Captain Henry C. Boys approached the challenge with a mix of caution and ambition. The early design called for a modified .50 caliber cartridge, but when initial trials failed to meet expectations, Boys pressed for something more powerful. He oversaw the development of a new .55-inch steel cord round, a bullet nearly 14mm wide, heavy enough to punch through the armour of any tank Britain expected to face. Factory minutes from 1936 show the pace accelerating. There was little time for perfection. The design team worked late into the night, running test firings in the rain behind the sheds, measuring penetration against plates salvaged from old tank hulls. The goal was simple: give every infantry platoon a weapon that could stop a tank at close range. The weapon that took shape was massive, over 5 feet long and weighing more than 35 pounds unloaded. But the numbers on the chalkboard looked promising. The new round could pierce more than 20mm of armour at 100 yards, outstripping the requirements set by the War Office. Captain Boys became a fixture on the factory floor, checking tolerances on barrels, inspecting the action of the bolt, and listening to the complaints of machinists wrestling with the rifle's awkward frame. The workforce at Enfield, men and women, many with calloused hands from years of production, pushed through the difficulties of assembling such a heavy, complex weapon. Each rifle was proofed, stamped and logged in the adoption record. The pressure was immense, Europe was rearming and Britain could not afford to fall behind. The emphasis on hard work was constant. By November 1937, the weapon was ready for acceptance. Just days before the final approval, Captain Boys died unexpectedly. The War Office, in a rare gesture, ordered the rifle to bear his name. The Boys anti-tank rifle entered official service that same month, its adoption recorded in factory ledgers and Ministry of Supply files. The decision was pragmatic. No one believed the rifle would be the last word in anti-tank defence. The minutes from Enfield meetings reveal a quiet assumption. Tank armour would get thicker, but not overnight. The Boys was a stopgap, meant to buy time until heavier guns or new technology could catch up. The rifle's size and recoil were noted even then, but urgency overruled comfort. The design team accepted the trade-off. In the words of one factory supervisor, "It is no one's idea of a perfect weapon, but it is what we can build now, and it will do the job." Production lines at Enfield and soon after at other factories began to churn out rifles by the thousands. The workforce, many of whom had never seen a tank up close, understood only that what they built would travel to the front, carried by men who would trust it with their lives. The Boys' rifle was never intended to be elegant. It was born out of necessity, shaped by the hands of ordinary workers, and named for the man who refused to accept that infantry should face armour unarmed. Its legacy is one of necessity and resolve. At the proof range, the Boys anti-tank rifle stands out, over 5 feet long, 36 pounds empty, its frame built for a single job, firing a .55-inch steel-cored bullet with enough force to pierce armour. The engineer loads a 5-round magazine, each cartridge nearly the length of a man's hand, almost twice as heavy as a .50 BMG. The bolt locks, the trigger snaps, and the rifle erupts. The muzzle brake vents a blast sideways, kicking up dust and spent powder. The barrel and receiver recoil as a heavy spring and hydraulic buffer absorb some of the shock, but the force remains brutal, enough to bruise shoulders and jar teeth. Comfort is an afterthought. The rubber-padded buttstock and walnut cheekpiece offer little relief. British manuals insisted on ear protection, a rarity then. Nicknames like Elephant Gun and Charlie the Bastard stuck, earned through pain. Firing was often shared in training to avoid injury. The rifle's punishment was the price of its promise. The heart of the Boys is its custom .55-inch cartridge, a hardened steel core, lead sleeve and jacket. The original Mark I round weighs 60 grams, leaving the muzzle at 2,450 feet per second. Later tungsten cored rounds push this to 3,250 feet per second. At 100 yards, the standard round penetrates just over 23 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armour, enough to punch through the side of a Panzer I or Panzer II. At 500 yards, penetration drops to 19 millimeters. High-speed footage captures the moment. The projectile smashes through steel, spraying sparks and fragments. Sometimes the round does not fully penetrate, but the shockwave blasts off razor-sharp splinters from the inside, spalling that can blind or maim anyone behind thin armour. Penetration. The rifle's power is not limited to steel. Fired into sandbags, the bullet punches through 10 inches without slowing. Against brick, it bores a 14-inch tunnel. British Home Guard manuals from 1944 confirm these figures, but warn that effectiveness drops sharply with distance or oblique angles. At 500 yards and a 40-degree angle, penetration falls to just under 9 millimeters, barely enough for the thinnest armour. In practice, the rifle's effective anti-tank range is about 300 yards, but closer is always better. Effective. Despite its bulk, the Boys is a bolt action. Each shot requires unlocking the bolt, extracting the casing and chambering the next round. Under ideal conditions, a trained gunner might fire 10 shots per minute, but in combat the process slows, each kick anticipated. The bipod and heavy frame give some stability, but moving the rifle is awkward and slow. Maintenance is another hurdle. The action is complex, filled with small screws and sliding parts that clog with mud and grit. Field repairs are unpopular and breakdowns common in harsh weather. Maintenance. The engineer examines a test plate pocked with holes and scars. Each impact tells the same story: raw kinetic energy delivered by a weapon at the edge of human endurance. The boy's rifle's strengths are clear sheer power, the ability to defeat light armour, and the psychological shock of a rifle that can stop a tank. But its limits are built in. The recoil is punishing, the weight a burden, and its effectiveness tied to a narrow window of armour and range. Every shot is a gamble against steel, paid for in bruises and headaches. In the spring of 1940, British infantry carrying the boy's anti-tank rifle faced the German advance across France and Belgium. The rifle's weight and recoil were a constant burden, but its presence changed the odds for platoons that would otherwise be defenceless. War diaries from the British Expeditionary Force describe small anti-tank teams assigned to cover crossroads and village lanes, places where panzers might appear without warning. The standard boys' team was 2 men, one to fire, another to reload or help reposition. Each round was precious, each shot a gamble. The rifle was most effective against the flanks and rear of German Panzer I and Panzer II tanks, where armour was just 13 to 15 millimeters thick. A direct hit could punch through at 100 yards, sending a steel core projectile into the cramped interior. Even if the round failed to punch all the way through, the impact often blasted off razor-sharp splinters of steel inside, a phenomenon known as spalling. Crews could be blinded or wounded by fragments, and panic spread fast in the confined space. Some German tankers abandoned their vehicles after a single shot, even if the tank itself was not destroyed. Oral histories from the Dunkirk perimeter recall the boy's rifle as both a lifeline and a torment. One platoon sergeant holding the line near Le Bastille described how the gun's recoil left his shoulder black and blue, but when he saw a panzer halt and its crew flee, the pain seemed worth it. The boy's rifle was never a weapon of finesse. Operators aimed for vision slits, tracks, or engine covers, hoping to disable or blind the tank. The rifle's 5-round magazine demanded careful shot placement, and reloading under fire was a test of nerves and teamwork. In the chaos of retreat, boys' teams bought precious minutes, firing from rubble piles or behind hedges, then dragging the weapon to the next position as German armour closed in. During the evacuation at Dunkirk, the boys played a quiet but essential role in the rearguard. As British and French forces fell back toward the beaches, small anti-tank teams delayed German advances along the canals and fields. Reports from the 2nd Infantry Division mentioned tanks stopped or turned back by boys' fire, even as the rifle's operators suffered bruises and exhaustion. The rifle's presence gave infantrymen a sense of agency in a battle defined by retreat. Against the thin armour of early war panzers and armoured cars, the boy's rifle worked, if only for a brief window. Its success was measured not in destroyed tanks, but in the moments of hesitation it forced on the enemy, and in the lives it helped save during the desperate days at Dunkirk. In the deserts of North Africa, the boy's anti-tank rifle found new hands and new challenges. Commonwealth troops, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans and Canadians lugged the heavy rifle across sand and stone, chasing Italian columns and defending against sudden armoured thrusts. The Italian M1139 and M1340 tanks, with side armour as thin as 25mm, became the rifle's main targets. At close range, a well-placed shot could punch through a vision slit or a track, sometimes forcing crews to abandon their vehicles. Reports from Sidi Barrani in December 1940 tell of a boys' operator halting an M1340 at 80 yards, the crew scrambling out as spall and smoke filled the turret. Such moments fed British newsreels and wartime propaganda, turning a single successful shot into a symbol of hope. But for the gunners, each engagement meant dragging 35 pounds of steel across shifting sands, setting up under blistering sun, and bracing for a recoil that left arms numb and shoulders bruised. Sand clogged the action, and moving the rifle from one firing position to another was slow, often requiring 2 men. Ammunition was precious. Each round had to count. Far to the north, Finnish ski troops faced a different kind of battlefield. Finnish forces received boys' rifles from Britain during the Winter War and the later Continuation War. Against Soviet T-26 tanks, often with 15mm side armour, the rifle could still do real damage. Finnish soldiers adapted the weapon for snow and cold, strapping it to sleds or hauling it behind them as they moved through forests and across frozen lakes. Extreme cold made the steel brittle, and the rifle harder to operate, but thick winter clothing helped absorb some of the recoil's punishment. Finnish memoirs describe firing from snowbanks, aiming for tracks and engine covers. In the hush of the forest, the blast echoed for miles, and a single hit could force a Soviet crew to abandon a tank, even if it was not destroyed. Field modifications appeared, extra padding on the buttstock, improvised bipod supports for shooting prone in deep snow, and slings adjusted to fit over heavy parkas. In both extremes, desert heat and Arctic cold, the boy's rifle demanded adaptation and endurance. Adaptation and ingenuity kept the weapon operational. Commonwealth and Finnish forces learned to work around its weight and recoil, improvising ways to keep the weapon operational in environments that punished both man and machine. The rifle's effectiveness now depended as much on the ingenuity of its operators as on the thickness of enemy armour. For every such story of a tank stopped or a crew forced out, there were many more where the rifle's limitations became clear. But its presence on the battlefield still gave infantry a fighting chance, if only for a little while longer. Inside a German tank struck by a boy's anti-tank rifle, the world narrows to chaos in an instant. A steel core bullet slams through the side armour, just 13 to 15 millimeters thick on a Panzer I or Panzer II. The impact throws off with a shower of sparks and razor-edge metal fragments, slicing through the cramped compartment. Crew members shout over the ringing in their ears. Smoke and dust swirl as vision slits crack and periscopes shatter. In the confusion, a driver might claw at his face, blinded by spall, while the radio operator struggles to stay at his post. Maintenance logs from panzer regiments in France and North Africa list repeated injuries from these splinters, eyes, hands and faces cut by shards of steel that erupted from inside the armour. German after-action reports rarely name the boy's rifle directly, but they record the effects of anti-tank rifle fire with clinical precision. In 1940, technicians patched clean holes through side plates and replaced shattered optics after every engagement in close terrain. Workshop notes describe tanks returning with cracked welds, buckled vision ports, and interior paint stripped away by the force of spalling. Crew casualties are logged as lightly wounded, or sometimes forced to abandon the vehicle entirely. The threat is not always fatal, but it is unpredictable. One hit may do nothing, the next may blind a driver or jam a turret ring. Word spreads quickly among tank crews. Orders circulate to keep hatches closed and avoid exposing flanks in narrow lanes or wooded approaches. Panzer units begin to slow down in areas where infantry might be hiding, manoeuvring to present thicker armour toward any suspected ambush. Instructors drill new crews to recognise the sound of armour-piercing rifle fire, to button up, and to accelerate out of danger zones. Even when the armour holds, the psychological effect is real. The knowledge that a single rifleman can turn a steel box into a death trap lingers in every movement and decision. German tactics adapt. Reconnaissance vehicles and light tanks become more cautious, using infantry screens and avoiding routes where anti-tank rifles are likely. Maintenance companies prepare for a steady stream of repairs, welding up small perforations, replacing periscopes, and repainting interiors scarred by spall. The boy's rifle, once dismissed as a lumbering oddity, now shapes the way German armour moves and fights. Its presence on the battlefield means that every advance into close country, every crossing of a village street, carries the risk of chaos inside the tank. For a brief window in 1940 and 1941, the threat of spalling and sudden injury from an armour-piercing bullet is enough to make even the most confident crews hesitate. By the summer of 1941, the numbers told a stark story. German tank armour was no longer measured in thin plates but in slabs that shrugged off rifle fire. The Panzer III, once vulnerable on its sides, now rolled into the battle with 50mm of frontal armour, more than double what the boy's rifle was designed to defeat. On the Panzer IV, new armour packages brought the front up to 80mm, a thickness that rendered the .55-inch projectile almost pointless except at the closest, most dangerous ranges. British Ordnance charts from the period show the rifle's steel core round could pierce about 23mm at 100 yards, but even the tungsten-cored ammunition, developed in desperation, barely scratched the surface of these new tanks. The effective window for the boy's rifle as a true anti-tank weapon had collapsed to less than 18 months. What had once been a weapon of hope was now an artifact of a vanished battlefield. Infantry gunners faced a choice: close to suicidal distances, or accept that their fire would do little more than chip paint or shatter a vision block. The race between gun and armour was over, and the rifle had lost. Factories in Enfield, Birmingham and Toronto ran at full tilt, churning out boys' rifles by the tens of thousands. Ministry of Supply files from 1940 record contracts for over 62,000 units, an enormous figure for a weapon already showing its limits in the field. The standard Mark I, with its circular muzzle brake and T-shaped monopod, dominated early production. Later, John Inglis and Company in Canada took over much of the output, manufacturing the simplified Mark I Star with a rectangular brake and a Bren-style bipod. An airborne version, shortened for paratroopers and stripped of its muzzle brake, saw only limited use before the project was cut short. Despite warnings from ordnance officers about the rifle's declining effectiveness, production lines kept running. The reasons lay deep in wartime bureaucracy. Contracts signed before the war could not be easily cancelled without disrupting supply chains or risking political fallout. The Home Guard and the Commonwealth forces still needed any weapon that could threaten an armoured vehicle, even if only on paper. Tungsten-cored ammunition was rushed into development, promising better penetration, but even this upgrade could not keep pace with the armour now rolling off German assembly lines. Procurement officials faced a grim calculus. Better to arm every platoon with something, however imperfect, than to leave them empty-handed. The result was a vast stockpile of boys' rifles, distributed across Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. By the time production finally stopped in 1943, the battlefield had already moved on, but the rifles lingered, proof of how slow institutions can be to let go of a weapon once it is too big, too costly, and too widespread to simply disappear. A British rifleman lies in the mud again, but the field is different now. The tank that approaches is no longer a thin-skinned Panzer Y or Panzer II, but a Panzer III with heavy plates welded across its hull. The boy's anti-tank rifle, battered and scarred from months of service, feels heavier than ever as he drags it into position. He waits, breath held, as the tank grinds closer. Its sides are now nearly twice as thick as when he first fired this weapon in France. The bolt locks, the crosshairs settle, and he squeezes the trigger. The rifle bucks with the same bone-shaking force, but the shot rings out with a hollow clang against the tank's armour. No sparks inside, no panic, no sudden halt. The tank keeps moving, engine roaring, treads tearing the earth. The gunner knows before the echo fades the rifle's time has passed. He pulls back, shoulders aching from the recoil, boots slipping as he retreats through the churned field. The boy's rifle, once a symbol of hope and defiance, is left behind, outmatched by the armour it was built to defeat. For a single heartbeat, he looks back. The tank rolls on, indifferent to the weapon that once could stop it. The battlefield has changed, and the rifleman, bruised and breathless, disappears into the smoke, carrying only the memory of when a single shot could turn steel into fear. Today, infantry still face armoured threats evolving faster than yesterday's weapons. The boy's rifle's brief relevance reflects a lesson modern armies cannot ignore. Battlefield advantage vanishes with each leap in technology. More than 60,000 were built, yet obsolescence came in months, not decades. The race between armour and firepower continues, measured not in inventions, but in the survival of those sent to use them. What would you trust in your hands?